Joining us now is former Texas Congressman Colin Allred. He's now running to unseat Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn. Welcome to the show. You suggested on X that a walkout was not the first option, but it was an option. Now that it's happening, was this the right moment to do it? And is there now still leverage? Is there still space for negotiation?
Well, this was absolutely the right thing to do. As I've gone all around our state, this is what folks wanted us to do. I was in church here in Houston this morning. This is on the lips and minds of so many Texans. And so I am just so dang proud of these state legislators for taking this step. This is a sacrifice for them. They're going to be away from their families. There are all kinds of things that they're going to be dealing with. I'm proud of them for taking this step. This was the last tool that they had in their toolbox to prevent this power grab, and that's exactly what it was. But there were also so many Texans around our state who testified at hearings like I did on Friday, who made their voice heard, who showed up, and who I think supported them. And now we have to support these legislators as they are outside of the state fighting for us.
Colin, you talk to a lot of people. You're out there, you're talking to constituents, you're talking to Texans. Do they understand that this was supposed to be about flooding and has become a Donald Trump wish list scenario? Do they get just how the Republicans in the State House are really using a session that's supposed to be about one thing to do something else?
They really do. In fact, I was just having this conversation this morning, actually, Molly, with, I think we had 2 hearings in the state legislature about flood relief and flood recovery. I think it's upwards of 7 or 8 that they've had on redistricting. And folks have noticed this. There were so many people here in Texas who are still grieving, whose hearts are still broken about what happened in Central Texas, what happened in the Hill Country. That's what our focus should have been all along. But of course, we know that they were using that in many ways to cover this power grab. And it's blatant. When I first got involved with voting rights over a decade ago as a voting rights attorney, it was a lot more subtle back then. And they used to try and have some kind of rationale around what they were doing. This is the most brazen, I think spineless thing that I've ever seen in my career, where they're openly saying, we've been instructed to do this. We know that it's not the right thing to do. We know we should be focusing on something else, but we're going to do it anyway. And Texans have taken notice.
What does this mean? I mean, this is happening at the same time that the Supreme Court is, it looks like, about to take further action to further gut the Voting Rights Act. That's coming out of Louisiana. And then this fight in Texas. And we know what Republicans in other states are looking at what Texas does and planning to potentially copy it. What is going to happen to minority voting representation in this country? What's at stake here for Black Americans, Black voters who had to fight tooth and nail to be able to stand in a line to vote in the first place, and who are now watching all of this roll back in 2025?
As we approach the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, it's unbelievable to me that we are here. As I said, I was a voting rights lawyer after my NFL career. I chose to do voting rights because I wanted to give everybody a voice, that everyone to play a role in our democracy, but also because of the history of what's happened in Texas and across the South, of making it harder for certain folks to vote. And where we are now is that the courts are no longer going to be our backstop. And one of the reasons why I ran for Congress and ended my civil rights practice was because I realized that we now had to write into law affirmatively these protections and no longer just rely on incredibly important historic legislation like the Voting Rights Act. That's why I was so frustrated, I think 3 years ago, when we had passed the For the People Act that banned gerrymandering like this out of the House of Representatives, but we couldn't get it through the filibuster in the Senate because a couple of folks decided that they thought that that was something they didn't want to adjust. That was outrageous then. That we are seeing the consequences now. But I think we also have to pause and say, what are we going to do to come back from this? What are we going to do knowing that the Supreme Court is likely going to gut Section 2, as they've done to Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, taking away the shield, now they're going to take away the sword. What are we going to do? And to me, it has to be that we're going to commit that the next time we have the ability to, and that we're going to talk to people about this, that we're going to fundamentally change the fairness in this country around voting, that we're going to ban gerrymandering nationwide, that we're going to have national standards around voting so you don't have these huge disparities from state to state, like in my state here in Texas. Texas. We can do this legislatively, and we have to do it when we get the power.
Colin, Elise Jordan here. I want to tap your expertise as a voting rights lawyer just to talk through this, because I am personally confused and you can explain it to me. So Texas Republicans can say that they want to redistrict for partisan aims and for their party, and that's completely legal according to the Supreme Court. But because of the Voting Rights Act, racial data has to be looked at to make sure that voters aren't disenfranchised. So when you're redrawing the map, it does have to be drawn into consideration in some way, shape, or form. So eventually, will there always be a court battle over this redistricting?
There will be a court battle, but let me explain this for folks at home. Listen, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has allowed what we call partisan gerrymandering. They seem to think that's okay. I think it's not. I think we should ban it legislatively, and as I said, we can do that. But for the moment, they've said that that's acceptable. But in Texas, what we're seeing is that this is not a partisan gerrymander. This is a racial gerrymander, and that still is impermissible. It's impermissible when you are reducing the overall voting power of minority communities. And that is what is being done here. That's what the court case that will follow this will seek to prove. And, listen, the state legislator said originally when they were being challenged in court on the first gerrymander that came in this decade, that they did not use race in consideration when they were drawing those lines because they knew they couldn't say that. Then the DOJ of a new presidency comes in. The DOJ sends a letter saying, actually, we think you did use race. And now that the state legislator has kind of reversed themselves and are saying, okay, actually, you're right, we should redraw it. And so they've lied in court as well. And I think that's something that folks should understand, is that this is so brazen that in any other context, in any other setting, this would just be, thrown out. And we have these kind of, kabuki theater hearings where they pretended like they're listening to people when they already had released the maps. And so what we have to do on the legal front is prove that when you're messing with districts like the 18th Congressional District here in Houston, that was originally Barbara Jordan's district, Mickey Leland's district, Sheila Jackson Lee's district, that when you're messing with these districts, that you're doing it, that's going to reduce the voting power of minority communities here in Texas. That's a racial discrimination, and that is why this map should be impermissible.
We have only a few seconds left before we have to go to break, but I have to ask you, do you not support someone like Gavin Newsom going and deciding to move ahead with a gerrymander of their own? Democrats who are saying right now, we've got to fight fire with fire. We understand it might be hypocritical, but we have to do it, they say, to save democracy. What do you think?
I think we have to fight fire with fire. I'm a voting rights lawyer who wants to ban gerrymandering across this country, and as soon as I get a chance, I will. But we have to make sure that we have the ability to prevent things like this from happening, but also to respond to it. Right now, my focus, of course, is still on these state legislators, and I want to close with this. Everyone should support them who's watching this in any way you can. You can find their information online about how you can support them. They need our support right now. This is something that has huge risks for them and huge costs for them, and we need to support them as they're standing up for voting rights in Texas, but also around the country.
Former Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for joining us tonight.